Some drinks evolve over time. Take the simple martini. Only a few ingredients, and yet, ever since the 1800s, it's been changing. Started off with a glass like this, and now it's in a glass like this. But it's more than just the glass. It's also gone from something being sweet, refreshing, something easily drank by anyone, to, quite honestly, if there's vermouth in it, it would be an amazing feat. So why hasn't that happened with the Manhattan? The Manhattan is gone the other way. It's gone sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. Well, in this video, we're going to show you how to make a Manhattan that's amazing, and yet it's still dry. Let's get to it. So a Manhattan traditionally will have Canadian whiskey in it, and that comes from the Prohibition era. Back then, you couldn't get whiskey in the United States. We do have that available now. I think we should change it over, especially when we're going on a dry Manhattan, because on a dry Manhattan, there is no vermouth sweetness to back it up. We're gonna have to use the whiskey sweetness directly. I suggest something like this here. This is Elijah Craig small batch. This particular bourbon is actually quite sweet to the taste for our bourbon. By using this, I think we'll gain some of the sweetness back in this dry Manhattan. It will make it a little bit more palatable as opposed to making it extremely dry using Canadian whiskey. The second ingredient is going to be vermouth. And to make sure we stay dry for this dry Manhattan, we're going to use a dry vermouth. This one has no real identifying spice to it, which some vermouths can have. This is pretty neutral, and by being neutral, I think it will go much better with the whiskey, and it really give us the flavors that we're looking for. Something more robust, and yet still sweet, just a tad, because once again, too much dry, and it's going to be really hard to palate. The final ingredient is going to be bitters, and in particular here, some Angostura bitters. This will give a nice offset of flavor that really will make the Manhattan taste like a Manhattan. Here's something that's a little bit different on how I want to make this Manhattan. A lot of times you see this here and it's a shaken drink. I think that's the wrong way to go. Much like the traditional martini, stirring is a better way. Getting that extra bubbles on the top, it doesn't really add to the flavor of the cocktail. And if anything, it helps dilute it down a little bit more than it really should be. Overall, I think a Manhattan should strike the tongue and it should be right away noticeable, not fluffy around the edges. Okay, so let's get to mixing. I've got ice. We're going to add to this 1.5 ounces of our bourbon. Very sweet bourbon. Then we're going to mix in 3/4 ounce of our dry vermouth. A couple dashes of bitters, and now we're ready to stir. You know you're done when the glass has condensation on it, it's cold to the touch, and the aroma has come off of the glass. This one is done. We're going to use a traditional cocktail glass here because we're going back to tradition on this. We're not going to sweeten this up. It's going to be a nice traditional dry Manhattan. And here you are, a dry Manhattan. Let's give it a taste. Wow, the aroma is, it's actually fruity, which is very interesting, thinking that there's no real fruit inside any of this. It's beautiful looking. The color is just fantastic. Between the bourbon and the bitters, it really made it very, very pretty. You know, I think we hit it on the mark. It's got a little bit of sweetness behind it, but it's not overly sweet. It's not syrupy, which is what I usually get and what you usually find inside a Manhattan. It's very syrupy. You got a cherry in the middle of it, which is great, except that that's not really what I was going for here. Really wanted something that's more traditional, back to the time of like a like a dry martini, but yet change out the martini for something a little bit more flavorful than a typical gin or a vodka. This, I think, really hits the mark. It's something that you would sip. It's not something that you will drink and then want to have another really quickly. It's something that if you ordered, you could have this and happily carry it around for a little while. I mean, I think that the real reason for having a drink such as this here is to have that type of flavor where you can be enjoying a cocktail and know that it's a cocktail. I think this is a type of cocktail that someone who enjoys a dry martini but is just tired of the typical vodka or gin, I think they would really enjoy this here because it has some amazing flavors. It really does have a good texture to it. It's very similar to a martini, and yet it's not a martini. It's got just a hint of sweetness on there, but it's not so dry that it's literally drying out your mouth. It has that wonderful fruity kind of characteristic to it, definitely coming from the vermouth. There's also, though, this hint of vanilla, which is happening from the bourbon. Wow, that's really good. That is amazing. If you like bourbon, if you like having something that's a little more traditional, something like a martini, but are tired of gin or just don't like gin, definitely try this drink out. It's really easy to make at home, just a few ingredients, and it tastes truly amazing. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button below. And if you like this kind of thing, think about hitting that subscribe button while you're there. It only takes a few seconds, and it really will help us out on this channel. Thanks, everyone, and cheers. Wonderful.